Now that Ahsoka's over, I'm hopeful that it will serve as a bit of a gateway for Star Wars fans who've never watched anything outside of the live-action movies or series. Ahsoka obviously had strong ties to the Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, and if you're interested in diving into those stories, it can be daunting. So I'm gonna try to help you out with a little information on how to best watch and read more about the characters from the series. If you want just the basics of Ahsoka, Disney Plus put together a playlist of her most important episodes in the Clone Wars, Star Wars Rebels, Tales of the Jedi, The Mandalorian, and the Book of Boba Fett. It's 29 total episodes, which is still over 10 hours worth of storytelling. It's not a bad start at all, but since it only includes 16 episodes of the Clone Wars, I would recommend giving that entire series a watch if you want to really learn about Ahsoka's past. Not to mention, you'll also get to learn quite a bit about the Night Sisters in seasons 3 and 4, which I would consider a major plus. But I need to give you a couple warnings. First, the series is not in chronological order. The Clone Wars was inspired by old serials, which weren't always told chronologically either, the same way the Star Wars movies or Indiana Jones weren't released in order. George Lucas decides what story he wants to tell and then finds out where in the timeline he thinks it should be. If you're watching on Disney Plus in release order, it can be a little confusing, but around season 3 the episodes hop around in time less and less. There is a list on StarWars.com that provides the chronological order, and I would recommend following that. I personally think it improves the viewing experience. Second warning, especially if you're a fan my age, the early seasons of the series are aimed at a much younger audience. It's a story that's meant to age up with the intended audience, so again, around season 3 you start to notice the storytelling getting more and more mature. Most of the animated Star Wars series follow this pattern. The first seasons are always pretty lighthearted when compared to the later seasons. That's not to say there aren't great episodes early on. Ambush, Rookies, Lair of Grievous, and the Ryloth arc are all standouts. I just say this because I've had multiple friends tell me they couldn't get into the Clone Wars and they needed encouragement to stick with it. I promise it's worth it. If the Clone Wars is still sounding a little daunting, there are fan lists online you can find, like this one from Reddit user I Am No Jedi that highlights just the recommended episodes centered around Ahsoka. But let's move on to Star Wars Rebels. This series is much easier to be introduced to. It follows a smaller cast of characters and it's told in chronological order. This is where you'll see the first appearances of Sabine, Hera, Chopper, Ezra, Zeb, Jason's father Kanan, Lothal, Purrgil, and Grand Admiral Thrawn. Ahsoka is also in the series, but not in a ton of episodes. She is in the best episodes of the series, though. Thrawn doesn't arrive as the main villain until season 3, but I absolutely think all of Rebels is worth your time to learn more about Ezra, Hera, and Sabine. I'll throw out the same warning as I did with the Clone Wars and say the earlier episodes are on the sillier side. I myself was hesitant to try the series when it first came out, but it very quickly won me over. Season 4 has 2 of my favorite Star Wars moments of all time in it. The Clone Wars and Rebels are the 2 series I would focus on, but if you're hungry for even more, Tales of the Jedi has 3 episodes about Ahsoka that you can quickly binge. There are also 3 episodes about Dooku that are fantastic. And I'll mention The Bad Batch. Ahsoka hasn't appeared in the first 2 seasons, but it's very much a spiritual successor to the Clone Wars, and it does have occasional connections back to Star Wars Rebels. Okay, let's say you've already watched all those series, or maybe you're more into books than television. I've got a few more recommendations for you. First up is the Ahsoka novel by E.K. Johnston. This is basically the longer, more detailed version of one of the Ahsoka episodes in Tales of the Jedi, getting into what she did in the year after Order 66. It's got some fun new lore in it, like how she created her white lightsaber blades. It's a fairly short and easy read. I haven't read it since it came out back in 2016, but I remember liking it. But when it comes to books, there's one character from the Ahsoka series that I've gotta give the focus to, Grand Admiral Thrawn. He was originally created by Timothy Zahn as a book-only character, so there are a ton of books about him, and it can be confusing to know what you're about to dive into. I'll start with his canon stories. Thrawn would be my primary recommendation. It tells the story of his rise within the Empire over the span of years. It's a great introduction to the character and is one of my all-time favorite Star Wars books. Compared to some of the other canon Thrawn books, I would say this one is a little easier to digest because it's still in a very familiar setting leading up to the 3rd season of Star Wars Rebels. Thrawn Alliances takes place directly after that season and starts to ease readers into Thrawn's motivations involving the rest of the Chiss people. It still has plenty of familiar elements because the story involves Darth Vader as well as flashbacks to the Clone Wars, Anakin, and Padme. Thrawn Treason rounds out the first canon Thrawn trilogy, taking place in the middle of the 4th season of Rebels and continues to flesh out a threat in the unknown regions called the Grisk. So next we have the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy, which includes Chaos Rising, Greater Good, and Lesser Evil. These stories all take place during the Clone Wars, but almost entirely set apart from familiar Star Wars characters or locations. It can be a lot to take in, but it's cool to see Zahn stretch out in his own corner of the universe, creating whatever he wants without any limitations. This is where we really learn about Thrawn's motivations regarding the Grysk. I personally doubt those motivations will come into the story we're seeing play out in live action. Reception to this trilogy was mixed because it can feel so different from normal Star Wars, but if you love Thrawn, you'll probably enjoy reading them. So those are all the canon Thrawn books, but I'm not done. Maybe you're a canon connoisseur who's never ventured into Star Wars Legends. I would say now it's the perfect time to give the original Thrawn trilogy a shot. Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and The Last Command were the books that not only introduced Thrawn, but also revitalized Star Wars when no other Star Wars stories were being told. Simply put, they are an important piece of Star Wars history. I think it's also clear that the story we're seeing in Ahsoka and the surrounding series is taking heavy inspiration from those books. There are clear differences between canon and Legends, but I think Dave Filoni is making an effort to tell a new story that acknowledges what came before. So the only warning I would give about reading the original Legends Thrawn trilogy is that you might wind up reading some potential spoilers for the future of the live-action series and maybe Filoni's movie. Okay, I'm almost done, but I have 3 more Star Wars books to throw out. If you're still wanting more Thrawn, you can read the Legends Hand of Thrawn duology, Spectre of the Past and Vision of the Future. The same way Heir to the Empire kicked off Star Wars storytelling through books in the 90s, these 2 books concluded a lot of those initial story arcs and really started to explore Thrawn's Legends motivations in a deeper way. And finally, there is Outbound Flight. This is an interesting one. It was one of our first real deep dives into the Chiss Ascendancy back in 2006. Even though it's Legends, Timothy Zahn has made some direct references to it in the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy, so it actually fits fairly well with the current canon. I wouldn't classify it as canon, but I also wouldn't say there's anything that currently contradicts it, and it's also a really cool story. Okay, to round out this video, I'm going to recommend a couple of books and movies that aren't a part of Star Wars, but fans might be interested in picking them up if they enjoyed the mythological themes of Ahsoka. For Greek mythology, check out Mythos by Stephen Fry. It's a pretty easy to digest telling of the stories of the ancient Greek gods. I've read it, I enjoyed it, and it actually enhanced my viewing of Ahsoka, being able to pick out some surprise references, like the names of the Great Mothers matching the Greek fates. Fry has also written a book about Greek heroes that I plan to read soon. But first, I'm going to read Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. That's a mythology I know far less about, and after seeing major references to characters like Balin Skull and Shin Hati, I would like to remove that blind spot. For a more recent mythology, if you've never read or watched Lord of the Rings, please get on that. I think most people have probably seen the movies by now, but they're wonderful. Tolkien is my second greatest fictional love after Star Wars. I was obsessed with Middle-earth back in the early 2000s, and the many allusions to Gandalf in the world of Tolkien were fun to pick out watching Ahsoka. And for my very last recommendation, this one is for Ray Stevenson specifically. I'm still brokenhearted at his passing because he was one of the best parts of the series in my opinion. He's in a ton of great stuff, but my personal favorite is RRR. Stevenson plays an absolute monster of a villain in it, and the story is kind of like a mythological, larger-than-life retelling of Indian history under British colonial rule. It is one of my favorite movies of all time, and I've talked about it before, drawing some parallels to how its themes match up with those of Star Wars. But that's going to be the end of my recommendations. I know that was a lot, especially when it comes to Thrawn books, but I hope that helped anyone who wanted to take their first steps into a larger world outside of live-action Star Wars. If you have any other recommendations, feel free to leave them in the comments. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on our socials, and consider checking out our Patreon page. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.